Hello and welcome to Alchemy 101, the show that aims to shine a light on how to find our gold and transform our lives into our best lives, helping us discover our true passions and nature, no matter how contrary that might seem, just like this nightingale, the bird that sings out in the dark. I'm JJ, the Practical Alchemist, and I am delighted to have you join me for more informative and transformative conversation. Today we hear from a guest with a remarkable story to tell. Candace Plattor is an addiction specialist, a TEDx speaker, and the author of a book called Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself. It's a book written from the heart, as Candace herself once was an addict. Now she helps others in her successful practice in Vancouver in Canada, and in particular she helps the families of addicts. I caught up with Candace online for what I think you'll agree was a powerful conversation about her life and work. Candace, it's wonderful to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Tell us, though, so that the listeners know exactly what it is that you do.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And JJ, it's great to talk to you again. I am an addictions therapist. I work primarily with the family members or other loved ones of people who are struggling with addiction. There's very little help out there for the family members, for people who love addicts, and they struggle right alongside the people that they love so much. It's a very difficult situation for them.
And now, I'm not sure whether that's slightly different in the UK. It might be, but I think generally the family members of addicts are overlooked to a great extent, aren't they? And they do need a lot of help, a lot of support, because this is not an easy thing to live with.
This is such a devastating thing for most families, you know. And I mean, I'm in Vancouver, Canada, which I consider to be the most beautiful place in the world. I'll just put a plug in for Vancouver. I mean, there are services for the loved ones. There aren't many, and if you think about how many services there are for the addicts, and how many services there are for the loved ones, there's a huge discrepancy. There's a huge gap in service there.
Yeah. And so you saw this gap in the service that's provided. Now, before we go on to talk a little bit more about your work, you've come to this out of personal experience, haven't you? So tell us about your story. Yeah, because I think your story is fascinating. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I will say that I grew up as a child of people with addictions. So I have that experience. And it wasn't an easy life for me living in that family. And then when I was 23, which is a long time ago, I suddenly became very ill. I had been quite healthy, you know, I'd had the normal childhood things, and I'd never really worried about my health. But I went out for lunch that day, and my whole world kind of blew apart. I got very sick, thought I had food poisoning, you know, the nausea, the diarrhea, all of that. But it never ended. And it was just devastating, horrifying for me, because it just went on and on and on. And that was in the early 70s. And I was later to be diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel illness for people who don't know what it is. Unfortunately, a lot of people do know what it is today because it's much more prevalent. But when I was sick in the beginning, the doctors had no idea what it was. And they basically told me it was all in my mind and I could just get better. And they didn't know what to do for a young woman who was I was so depressed and sick and unhappy and in pain, you know. So they prescribed a lot of medications for me that were very addictive. In their defense, at that time, addiction was not on the radar the way it is today. So I understand that. Unfortunately, there are still many doctors who prescribe those medications, and addiction is on the radar, but they were giving me codeine and morphine and Demerol and Valium and all kinds of things that my body got very used to, and it helped with the Crohn's. So I just kept taking them. I also smoked a lot more pot, which I had tried in university. It wasn't a problem, but it became a problem because pot is addictive. People sometimes think it isn't, but it is. And all of those substances are depressants in the human system. I didn't know any of that either, but they are. And so if you fast forward about 15 years from when I started taking those medications, I was still quite sick with Crohn's, but I didn't have to feel it as much because I had all those painkillers. But I also became so depressed from all of those substances that I became suicidal. I thought quite seriously about ending my life. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just knew that I didn't want to live this way anymore. And I knew that I had enough pills in my medicine cabinet. I knew that I could time it right so that nobody would find me in time. So I was thinking about those things and scaring myself because I thought I just might do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think back on it, and I remember that day that the first time I really thought seriously about it. And it's a choice point. It's a real choice point. There are so many choice points in our lives. And what I decided to do was reach out for help instead of swallowing all those pills. And I called the Vancouver Crisis Center, and whoever it was who talked with me that day basically saved my life.
That's an extraordinary story, but it's actually quite common, isn't it? And
I think it is common.
Yeah. And you were smoking the pot presumably for the pain, or was that just recreational?
No, it wasn't recreational. I was smoking alone. I was, I was quite isolated in my drug use most of the time. It was to take away the pain, to take away the shame of this kind of illness, because this kind of illness gives you the symptoms that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about diarrhea. Nobody wants to talk about throwing up. Nobody wants to talk about that kind of thing. And so there was a stigma of real shame for me around having Crohn's. And it took me a long time to get over that, to get past that. I had to do a lot of my own interpersonal work to be able to get to the place where I am now. And I just want to say, if there's anybody listening that has an inflammatory bowel illness or irritable bowel, it's definitely doable to have a better life and to feel better if we take care of ourselves in the right way. So I just really want to encourage you to please take a look at, the science behind this and what you can do for yourself. It's an incurable disease, they say, but it can get a lot better.
I believe it can, yes. And I mean, diet and gut health, all part of it. And then
stress, making sure you're dealing with your stress in a healthy way. Yeah, absolutely.
And not reaching for the opioids and the cocktail of medication that you were taking at that point, which then led you into becoming an addict.
It did. It led me to becoming an opioid addict.
Yeah.
Whoever thought that would happen to me, and when we start using either medications or street drugs or whatever, most people who become addicted never think they're going to become addicted. I mean, that's for the other guy. That's not for me. I can handle it, until I can't. And this is what happens to people.
Yeah. And so was your family suffering as a result of all of this, or were you living on your own at this point?
I was living on my own, and I came from a family, my mother was classically narcissistic, and so everything was all about her. She didn't have a lot of time or energy or even curiosity about me. My father was quite self-absorbed as well. So I didn't have the support of my family in the way that I wish I had. In some ways, I think maybe that was a blessing in disguise, though, because I really had to find my way. And I think addicts really, addicts in active addiction, like I was, really need to find their way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But if they have supportive families, that's wonderful, as long as the families can be healthy emotionally with them. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the problem, isn't it? Often the families are unable to be healthy with it. It's a very tricky dynamic, isn't it?
They don't know how. They don't know, this, again, it hasn't been on the radar. What happens to the families? That just hasn't been talked about enough. And it's such an important, vitally important part of an addict's recovery. So, families aren't bad families. There's the stigma of that too. And families that are dealing with somebody's addiction often don't talk about it. They don't know how many other families are struggling with this, and they're all over the world, everywhere you look. And people aren't talking about it. But, families who are having this issue are not, quote unquote, bad families. They're people who don't know what to do. And then when they find out what they can actually do that will actually help, that's when recovery starts to happen for everybody.
For everybody, yeah?
Everybody,
yeah.
Everybody's affected by this. Everybody needs to heal. It's not just the addict that needs to heal.
And you see, that's an interesting point, because you don't hear people talking about that too much. It's always the focus is on the addict and not
on the addict.
Yeah, and not on the people around the addict. And of course, you might ask, how did the addict get to that point, get to that stage? Now, for you had an illness which, for which you were prescribed these medications, which we now know are quite dangerous in terms of health, and they are addictive. How did I know you said that when you phoned the Vancouver Crisis Centre, that person saved your life, but what were your next steps then to your recovery?
Well, I really want to tell you what that person said to me.
Oh, please do.
It was a life changer. That person, I don't even remember if it was a man or a woman. I think it might have been a woman. But so I'll say she said that I didn't have to keep using these drugs, that I had a choice and I could find another way to manage my pain. And I had a choice about whether I was going to use or not. And I thought that was brilliant. Brilliant. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to make that choice. I didn't know what I was going to do with all the pain and shame and everything else that I felt. But it was such an empowering message, So what I did was I followed her directions. I went to a suicide prevention counseling agency in Vancouver, and they suggested that I go into a psych ward in one of our local hospitals. And that was when psych wards still looked like they looked in the movie Cuckoo's Nest.
I was going to say Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, gray walls, gray concrete walls, that kind of thing. Most psych wards don't look like that anymore. But I decided to do that. It was kind of like take my clothes away from me, or if I'm out there in the world, I'm not sure what I'm going to do to myself. So I was in really bad shape. I was suicidally depressed. I was in very bad shape. And when I was there, I got some really good counseling when I was there. And I also met a couple of people who were also trying to stay off drugs and alcohol. And I didn't know anything about addiction. I never even put that together for myself that I was an addict. It just It just wasn't on my radar at all.
Wow.
But I met these two people who were going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings, 12-step program, every day at noon across the street at the nurses' residence. And so I started going with them. And that was the beginning of my recovery. I don't go to 12-step programs anymore. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we will do. Yeah.
But I started there, and that was another thing that saved my life. I would sit in those meetings and I would just weep. I would weep, and the big burly bikers, with chains and leather and tattoos and effing this and effing that when they spoke, they would come to me and they would hug me and they would say, keep coming back.
Wow.
And that wasn't something I heard in my family, so I kept going back, and I stayed in 12-step programs for about 10 years. I think I took a 10-year cake. I'm now almost 35 years clean and sober. One day at a time, just like it is for everybody, making that choice.
Powerful stuff from Candace there. We have to take a short break now, but stay tuned for more from Candace Plattor after this.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
How good are vitamin C supplements? Usually only a small proportion of vitamin C actually reaches your cells and has a positive effect. Whereas the high absorption levels of Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C help maintain optimal vitamin C levels in your body and strengthen your immune system. Now get 10% off when you choose Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C capsules. Just quote 10 off at goldmanlaboratories.com.
Do you suffer from pain? B-Cure Laser, a home-use CE-approved medical device for the effective treatment of pain, is now available in the UK. The results of a double-blind trial has shown that B-Cure Laser offers a significant reduction in pain compared to the placebo group. To get your special B-Cure offer now, call free on 0808 501 5122 or Google Radio Pro London. B-Cure Laser.
B-Cure Laser.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Back to Candace now. She carried on by saying that people don't want to see themselves as addicts.
But what I know to be true is that inside of us, for all addicts, because I've been working in this field now with addicts and their families for 30 years. And what I know is that inside, people who are abusing substances or behaviors know that there's a problem. They know they have a problem. There's no question about it. They know. Whether they're going to choose to do something about it or not is really the question. But, nobody wants to say I'm an addict or I'm going to be an addict in this lifetime. That's fun. Nobody says that.
That is true. And you use the word choosing and choice a lot here. And I guess that's key, that we all have a choice. And I'm guessing as well that once the addict chooses not to be an addict any longer, that's when things start to change.
Once the addict is, I'll talk about we as addicts, once we are really willing to look at the fact that our lives are a mess, that something is very wrong here, that's where the choice point happens. Am I going to choose recovery? Am I going to choose to stay in active addiction? So for me, I was willing to not do this anymore. And I was remembering what the person said at the crisis center, that I had a choice. This was why I had difficulty staying in 12-step programs, because in those programs, the basic messages are, you have a disease, You will have that disease forever. Once an addict or alcoholic or whatever, always one. You are powerless over this disease, and you will relapse, because relapse is a normal and natural part of recovery. Those are the messages that are given. And I remember sitting in a meeting one day, I can see myself in the room thinking, wait a minute, I'm not powerless over this. I've got like 10 years clean and sober. I'm not powerless. And I have a disease. I have Crohn's disease,
Yes.
which is incurable. Addiction isn't incurable. I haven't been an addict, in active addiction anyway. I haven't been an addict for a really long time. And so and when I decided to clean up, I never relapsed. I'm happy about that. I'm proud of that. There were many times that I wanted to just use something, take me away from the emotional pain, the physical pain. And one day at a time, I stayed clean and sober,
Yeah.
and that's something to really be proud of. And every single person who has struggled with addiction in the way that I did, who is clean and sober now, whatever amount of time they have, they know it's a choice.
Yeah.
They know
Yes.
it's a choice.
Yeah. And I have had my issues with addiction, but nothing like yours. I smoke cigarettes. Now, they do say
too.
yes, you too. They do say that nicotine is more addictive than heroin. And I smoked cigarettes from a young age. I was a teenager, and I smoked a lot. But it wasn't until I absolutely decided that I was done with it that I managed to stop.
Yeah.
So there is something about this decision, this choice, this, okay, that's enough now. When we come to that place, I don't consider myself an addict. Maybe that comes back to the previous point we were making. Nobody thinks of themselves as an addict. But what I'm trying to say is I don't think of myself as a recovering nicotine user. Mm-hmm. I'm done with it.
Yeah. I totally understand where you're coming from. Yeah. I identify as an addict mostly because of the work that I do with people. Mm-hmm. I want them to know that I really get it. I understand it from so many different angles. But if I wasn't in this profession, I would be the same as you.
Yeah.
And I also started smoking when I was about 16 or 17. Yeah. My father, who was a smoker, used to buy me cartons of cigarettes. Mind you, that was back a long way before.
That would be child abuse now, right?
That would be child abuse now. Yes, it certainly would be. And when I was about 6 months clean, a friend of mine wanted to quit smoking, and she asked me to come to a quit smoking course or something that was being put on. So I went with her thinking I had tried to quit so many times. I didn't think I would ever quit. I thought I was powerless over this. And so I went to this thing with her, and I wound up quitting, and she continued to smoke, which is quite ironic. But for me, I remember thinking, I'm not putting that poison into my body anymore. The drugs, the alcohol, I'm not putting that in my body. Why am I still putting this poison into my body? So it was at about 6 months clean that I just said, I'm done with this too. And I've never looked back. And I'm so glad, so grateful to not be smoking anymore.
Yeah. So not smoking, not drinking alcohol, not taking any opioids, any pharmaceutical drugs, that sort of thing. Are you completely clean from all of that as well? Yeah.
Yeah. I've had times in my recovery. I can tell you one experience if you want me to.
Yeah,
I've had times in my recovery when I've had to use painkiller drugs because of my Crohn's. So when I was about 8 months clean, I had to have my third and last surgery for Crohn's. And it was a bowel resection. It was a real slice and dice kind of thing. It wasn't a laser surgery that would have been easier. But I let them know at the hospital that I was an addict because I really wanted to take my 1-year cake. I mean, I really wanted my 1-year cake. So I'm 8 months clean. I wake up from the surgery connected to a morphine drip that I could control with the push of a button.
Wow. Okay.
And I looked at that and I said, okay, well, I'm going to like this, because I loved the feeling of being high. I was one of those addicts. I just loved it, but it was really painful. The surgery was over the top kind of painful. So I made a decision. Again, I made a decision. I was going to use that for 2 days. I'd had surgery before. I knew what the pain was like. I would use it for 2 days, and then I was going to have the nurses take it away and go on something like extra strength Tylenol. And that's exactly what I did. But I was still in agonizing pain. So what I asked the nurses to do was to keep bringing me ice packs to put on my belly. And I was sometimes in my hospital bed just screaming, and the nurses kept coming in saying, are you sure you don't want us to medicate you? And I kept having to say, no, please don't. I'm an addict. I can't, And little by little, the pain subsided. I knew it would. The pain subsided, and I didn't have to use, and that was the last time I ever used any drugs like that.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Well done you, because it takes some strength to do something like that.
Yeah, morphine's a nice drug,
Yeah. And I wonder how many people who don't have your strength, who didn't think they had the choice, have gone through that and then relapsed into drug use.
Yeah. I mean, there's a line between use and abuse of these kinds of medications. Yeah. And some of my clients that I work with need to take these kinds of drugs. And we talk about the difference between use and abuse. Where is that line for you? Where is that line? So I would never say to somebody, don't ever take this drug. It's up to the person. It's their choice. But let's see how we can manage that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I was interested to hear you talking about the 12-step program and, how you didn't have a disease. You had Crohn's, that was a disease, but your addiction wasn't a disease. Now, I know certainly with people who are deemed to be alcoholics, they are told and they are led to believe that they have a disease. So you would take issue with that?
I definitely take issue with that. I think it's such a disempowering message to give people, and I absolutely disagree with it. I have a disease. I know what that's like. I can't just get rid of Crohn's. I can make it better, but it's still here, and I still deal with it. Addiction isn't like that. We can get rid of addiction. We can stop addiction. We can just stop. Or we can work with somebody to taper off, or we can, I'm not saying that somebody has to just stop like I did. There are many roads that lead to this. But to call, what people like to do is call addiction a brain disease, because of course there is brain involvement in addiction. Of course, that's not rocket science, but there's brain involvement in everything that we do. We're wired that way. And so I know people can't see me, but I'm lifting my finger up and down, and there's brain involvement as I lift my finger up and down. So there's brain involvement in everything. If you're going to call addiction a brain disease and that you're powerless over this, what incentive do people have to even try to recover? And there are thousands, millions of us all over the world who have recovered, because it's not incurable. It's absolutely not.
And yet the prevailing wisdom is to say that people should carry on calling themselves alcoholics, as in recovering alcoholics. I mean, what do you feel about that?
I think that's a person's choice as well. My company is called Being at Choice, because choice is such a big part of just being alive. We're making choices in every nanosecond of our lives. I think if somebody is in recovery and wants to feel safer, maybe if they remind themselves that they're an addict, or an alcoholic that, or a gambler or whatever, if reminding oneself of that is helpful to keep them from doing it, then by all means, but I don't think it's necessary for everybody to label themselves that way. And I also think this is really important, the family members of people with addiction, to tell families that their addict that they love so much and they want to see healthy again, to tell them they have a disease that they're powerless over and they'll never really get better because once they get better, they'll relapse. I think that's the worst thing you can tell a family member.
Yeah.
When an addict believes in the disease model, they have two ways that they kind of relate to that. One is very passively, well, I have a disease and I can't help it. I mean, that's just how it is in my life. The other way is pretty aggressively for some people, I have a disease and I'm powerless over that disease, so get out of my face and quit bothering me.
Yes.
And either way, that's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I get really passionate about that.
No, Candace, and I love your honesty, and it's something that we've all seen. Of course, we've all witnessed friends, people we don't even know, talking about addiction in that way. So, yeah, and I have to say that it's always struck me as a disempowering aspect of the 12-step program that people are all the time that they have a disease, and also relinquishing to a higher power. But the power is in you. The power is in me. Yeah. We have the power.
And people who have been raised in traditional religion in their families, people who have been raised that way, seem to have some comfort with that language. And that's okay. If it, what I want to say about the 12-step programs, there's some really good stuff in the 12-step programs.
Yes.
There's fellowship of people who are wanting to do the same thing, like-minded people. There's sponsorship. You can call somebody at 3:00 in the morning if you feel like you're going to use a drink. I mean, there's good stuff there. And there's problematic stuff there. And there's especially problematic stuff because it's 2022 now and the 12 steps were written in 1935. It doesn't quite, transfer well for a lot of people. So, in the 12 steps, they talk about God as you understand him, capital G, capital H. This is really hard for a lot of people in today's spirituality, in today's gender equality. It's just really hard language for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. And there's a dogma in the 12-step programs that says you don't change the wording of these steps ever.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, some very brave people have done that and created different programs. But if you're going to 12-step meetings, these same steps are read exactly the way they were written in 1935, over and over and over again every day if you go to meetings. So, I think the spirituality of me, for me anyway, to give my power over to something that is outside of me, I have trouble with that.
Yeah.
To see it as male, I have trouble with that as a woman. So some people don't have a problem and they do really well in the 12-step programs. One of the problems is that the rehab centers, the treatment centers, are still almost exclusively 12-step based. So when you go to treatment, I went to treatment, it was the same there. You're basically told you have a disease that you're powerless over, you're probably going to relapse, and you need to you need to turn your, how does it go? Turn your life over turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand him. That's what we're taught to do in recovery centers. There are some now that are more biopsychosocial, which is fantastic, and there need to be more of those. I mean, it depends on where you're coming from in your life and what works for you. The 12 steps is one model. Thankfully now there are many other models. When I was going through it years and years and years ago, when I was starting out, the 12-step programs were the only game in town. So,
time to step away for another ad break now, but there's more to come from Candace after these messages from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Scalar light is the quantum energy emitted from the universe, from the sun and stars. Now, Tom Palladino, a humanitarian and scalar light researcher, has created the world's only scalar light healing system, a system that can bring long-distance healing and wellness to humans, pets, and plants via a photograph. Get your free 15-day trial now at scalarlight.com or click on the Scalar Light banner on the UK Health Radio website.
Shields like masks are top of mind right now, but did you know you have inner armor working constantly to protect you from pathogens? It keeps you healthy and thriving. It's your immune system. Ion Gut triggers the body's natural ability to support gut strength all year long, so your immune system can protect you when you need it the most. How are you treating your inner armor? Visit uk.ionbiome.com to learn more. Ion Gut. Protect what protects you.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Back to addiction specialist Candace Plattor now for the last part of our chat. I'm curious to know what kind of work comes up when you're working with the families, and what are the issues that they face?
yeah. So many people, I just want to say this happens in all kinds of families.
Yeah.
The analogy that I like to use is if you're walking down the street or you're in a coffee shop or Safeway, a grocery store, or anywhere really, we don't have signs on our foreheads that say, I am affected by somebody else's addiction, but I would say probably 99.9999% of people are affected by somebody else's addiction, or they know someone who is.
Yes.
That's how rampant this is now.
Yeah.
So working with just the addict and not working with their families makes the recovery a lot harder for people like myself to work with, because there is dysfunction in the family unit and the behaviors that they have that needs to be changed in order for the addict to begin to change, right? So loved ones are often what we call people pleasers, codependent. A codependent, my simple definition of codependency is when we put somebody else's needs ahead of our own on a fairly consistent basis. And many, many loved ones of addicts do exactly that. So they put their own needs on the back burner. They focus almost entirely, exclusively. They think about the addict. They worry about the addict. They talk about the addict if there are people to talk to about it. This becomes their whole lives. And one of the hallmarks of people pleasing is that you absolutely hate conflict. So for those of you out there who are loved ones of addicts, you know what I mean. And I am a recovering people pleaser. I am a recovering codependent. I don't do it very much anymore. When I do, it always feels really icky. But you know for yourself that you hate conflict. You will do pretty much anything to not have to deal with conflict. And addicts in active addiction, they seem to thrive on conflict. You try to say to an addict, we don't want you to use anymore. They punch a hole in the wall, or they push you out of the way physically, or they call you an effing bitch, or they become aggressive because they're terrified of giving up this addiction that they think helps them get through life.
Yes, and that's the key, isn't it? That they think helps them get through life.
Yeah, it really only makes their lives very narrow, very small. So when you have people who hate conflict, know that when they say the word no to an addict, that's the word that addicts hate the most, is no, that something terrible is going to happen. They know this. So they don't say no. They keep saying yes. Mom, can I have $20? I need $20. You say no, something awful is going to happen. You say yes, even though you know where that money's going to go. It's going to go in their arm, up their nose, down their throat, and you give the money to them anyway. We call this enabling. And enabling behaviors, that's one. Giving the money is one. There are many others. But enabling behaviors keep the addict stuck in their addiction. And to me, doing anything that keeps an addict stuck in their addiction is never a loving act. It feels loving. Sure, honey, here's $20. It isn't. So the family needs to learn how to have different boundaries, how to be okay with their addict's anger, how to deal with that kind of thing so that the addict can get well, so that they have a fighting chance of getting better.
And it's fantastic that you're doing this work because it's not easy. It's not easy for anybody. It's not easy for the families. It's not easy for the addicts. So, yeah, it's wonderful that there are people like you who have the experience as well and who know from first-hand experience what's going on here. And I wanted to just draw to a close by saying, we're talking on Zoom here, and I can see a butterfly behind you, and that's quite significant.
Yes, it's a great big butterfly. It's a metallic, beautiful butterfly. Yes.
So tell us about the butterfly.
I want to tell you about, I love talking about the butterfly. So I love butterflies, and not just because they're beautiful and wonderful. I love butterflies because a butterfly starts out as a caterpillar. And the caterpillar gets absolutely no respect in our society. The caterpillar is squished by little boys.
Yes.
And the caterpillar is shrieked at by little girls. Yeah, a caterpillar. And the caterpillar is dissected in biology class. I remember dissecting caterpillars in biology class. And they just get no respect. But the caterpillar has an amazing instinct. It knows that if it doesn't change, it's going to die. I think that's really wonderful and important. So what the caterpillar does is it shimmies up a tree trunk and it shimmies down a limb of a tree and it turns itself upside down and it creates the sack full of bug juice, I like to call it. And it sits in this bug juice, right? It sits in this bug juice for as long as it takes to basically change its entire DNA.
Yeah.
And when it's ready, not a minute before, when it's ready, it comes out as this amazingly beautiful, strong but fragile, vulnerable creature like we all are as human beings. It comes out and nobody says, ew, a butterfly. Everybody says, wow, a butterfly.
Yeah.
And the butterfly gets a whole lot of respect. And I am a butterfly most days. I have my caterpillar moments, I do. But most days, I really like who I've become. And I knew I had to make a huge change to be able to live a different life if I was going to stay alive. So butterflies are really important.
It's perfect, Candace. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. It's wonderful. Yeah. And now I'm just thinking if anybody who is thinking, as they're listening at home, I'd love to speak further with Candace about that. I'd love to have her work with me or our family. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that we do, my business is called Love with Boundaries. That's my website. www.lovewithboundaries.com. And what we do is we offer a free 30-minute consultation on Zoom usually. It can be done by phone too, but usually on Zoom. And we tell you, we hear about what's going on for you. We tell you how we can help you. We see if we're a fit for each other. There's no obligation at all, no cost at all. And we tell you, about our programs, about how we do our counseling. And we achieve just amazing results with families who are really ready to do this work. And it is hard, but it's harder, I think, to keep going on the way a lot of families are right now, feeling hopeless and powerless and helpless. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
If you want the help, we are here for you. And that's why we're here. We want to help you. So all you have to do is go on the website at lovewithboundaries.com and fill out our questionnaire. As soon as we get it back, it's a short questionnaire. It's not one of these things. It's going to take you forever. And as soon as we have it, we will get back in touch with you and we'll set up a time for that 30-minute consult.
That's just wonderful, Candace. And I've said it before, but I will say it again. It's fantastic that there are people like you in the world doing this work. And
Thank
what
you.
a story and what a life and what a transformation. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Wasn't easy, but it sure is better.
Yeah,
it sure is better.
Yeah.
And there's 12-step programs have slogans that stand the test of time. I love a lot of them. I think my favorite one is don't stop. Don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So please don't give up. Keep trying. Get in touch with us. There's help here for you if you're the family member of somebody with an addiction.
I love it. Thank you so much, Candace. It's been a privilege to speak with you today.
Me too. Thank you. Yeah.
Wow. Powerful stuff from Candace Plattor there. What a life. What a transformation. Now, if you're going through any of the issues Candace mentioned, I hope you found what she said helpful. And do remember, you can reach out to her. She may be in beautiful Vancouver, but don't let that stop you wherever you are. Now, sadly, we're at the end of the show. Remember, you can download this episode from the Alchemy 101 page on UKHealthRadio.com, and you can listen to it again as many times as you like. And do stop by to say hello on Instagram and Facebook. You'll find me as the Practical Alchemist there. Meanwhile, I hope you'll join me again right here on UK Health Radio for more transformative conversations. Until then, it's goodbye from me and that nightingale playing us out.